All right. Uh, want to welcome you all to the platform for Wisdom for Life and Leadership. I'm the founder and curator of this platform. Through this platform, we hope to help individuals ascertain wisdom both in the secular and in the sacred arena. Wisdom, godly wisdom from that could help in them achieve the calling of God over their lives. And so from time to time, we try to bring people on our platform to interview, to ascertain the wisdom that God has placed upon their lives, maybe to reflect on certain issues, to reflect on certain things in history. And today, I'm so glad to have a friend, a brother on this line with me. We've known each other now for so many years now, probably 20 years now and counting. And so it's like the way time flies, right? And so I'm so glad to have Jahmal Holland here with us today. Let's give him a virtual clap as we start this session this evening. We're super excited to have him here with us online. He's here with us all the way from Southern California, Los Angeles to be exact, originally from the Bay Area, a very near and dear place to my heart, right? Second home. um, and so he'll tell you more about his story, but I'm gonna read a little bit about his biography a little bit here, just kind of give him a little bit of his accomplishments and why we're bringing him on today. Um, and because I really believe that he has, I believe, some important things to share with us today, and so we're super excited to hear from him. He's always a thought leader, someone who I really admire his mind and his faith and his art and the things that he's been given and to offer to humanity. And he's a multi-talented man and brilliant man, and I'm really excited to call him friend. Jahmal Holland is an award-winning filmmaker who creates visual and narrative stories through drama, documentaries, and music. His first directing effort was a viral music video that attracted interest from CNN. I actually do remember that. The Discovery Channel and Intel Electronics. His first feature film released in Nigeria, still standing, and actually you can find it on Amazon now as well. Is available on Amazon on demand and earned him a nomination for for an AMA Viewers Choice Award for screenwriting and Golden Icon Academy Award for Best Diaspora Film. His USC thesis, and you heard that USC thesis. Is a grad of the Trojans, right? I don't know how you guys is that the song? Because my sister went to USC, so I
Yeah,
do remember that. Whenever you guys see each other, right? So
it's peace. It's
yeah, that's
a
it.
fight on.
Right on, yeah. um, um, his USC thesis film Spanish Fly in 2015 is streaming on Amazon Prime right now, so go check it out. Definitely there. Jamal's most recent projects include directing award-winning shorts, film like The Anthem of Our Souls in 2018, writing screenplays for films in development, The Greatness, and Brackish Waters, and directing a short film, The Turnaround, in 2019, among many others. Jahmal Holland's attributes is diverse storytelling, true film and music, to growing up in a social and ethnic culture of San Francisco. And we kind of mentioned that earlier. He's a Bay Area native, specifically San Francisco. He creates cinematic productions about urban legends, ordinary people who do extraordinary things. His stories inspire and uplift traditionally underrepresented individuals and communities. And Jahmal earned his undergrad degree from University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA. In his and the degree earned there is a degree in anthropology, And also he pivoted during that time into also writing songs in multiple genres from hip hop to gospel, EDM, and dubstep. He's a very talented man. And if you Google his name, you'll see some of his work out there, both on the music front as well as in film. I've had an opportunity to collaborate with him one time, and so hopefully we get some more opportunity to collaborate together. But a true artist,
No
I can
question.
really say that. His expansive variety of work includes writing, stage productions, producing and directing music videos, acting, singing, hip hop, and spoken word performances. Jahmal completed his master's in fine arts in film and television production at USC School of Cinematic Arts, sorry, and he and his wife Ruby reside in Los Angeles, California. My wife and I called them friends. You know, they knew us before we had kids. They knew us before we were married, actually. So they we go way back. So we go way back, and so truly glad to have you on the platform, Jahmal.
Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome. Yes. We are so glad to have you on here with us to discuss something that is very, I think, near and dear to both of our hearts. And I felt that I was thinking to, I was like, man, who can I get that I think can do this justice and really speak authentically on, I believe, what I know we want to learn together here. But I mean, I shared a little bit of your biography, but and what you've done, through your art and a little bit of your background. But I want to kind of go back and start a little bit from the beginning, because I think that will help kind of frame what we want to talk about a little bit to this evening. And I think that is important for us at this time. That today is the 28th of February, which is the last day of Black History Month. I said something today in a meeting. I said we shouldn't stop celebrating Black history the last
Mhm.
day of February, right? We should celebrate Black history all the time because it's an important part of human history,
Right.
not just American history, that needs not to be pushed down, but something that needs to be uplifted in this time. We are in a time that reality is not appreciated. Absolute truth, absolute truth seems not to matter. And so we do need to level set and set the record straight. And I have nobody better than to bring to talk about this. So our specific topic this evening is wisdom and reflection from Black history, from struggle to strength, from struggle to strength. Um, Jahmal, tell us a little bit about your upbringing because I think it's important. But the way I want to start it a little bit is I think we were talking about this earlier. I think a lot of people, when they think about Californians, especially African Americans in California, typically they don't understand their genesis and kind of where how a lot of them migrated to California in the 20s and the 30s, even prior to that in the 40s, and the different migration patterns that brought blacks into the West Coast, especially a place like San Francisco. And I know you've shared that with us in the past, but I want to kind of like get a little bit into that history of how your family came to the West Coast.
Yeah. Well, my people originally from New Orleans, Louisiana. Um, Johnson family, which became the Watts family.
Mm,
My grandmother married John Holland, and they had my mother. Um, and so that's where I get my name. Um, but my grandfather was from Oklahoma,
mm,
actually, actually less than 50 miles from Tulsa,
wow.
and his childhood and his background intersects the historic, Black Wall Street incidents,
Mm,
existence and incidents of its destruction. Um, and my grandmother was part of the jazz era, the jazz movements that defined the 20th century and were the root system for Black culture and music, life and lifestyle for the rest of that, and continuing until today. New Orleans is the birthplace of jazz, and she was intertwined, and her family was. Her brother was just honored in the city of San Francisco because he was a historic Black business entrepreneur, and also created a small business exchange newspaper and marketplace for Black people to be able to succeed and coalesce, collaborate, to combine efforts and make sure that bases could be covered so business could be accomplished, especially at a time when exclusion was in its prime. Uh, so, this kind of version of exclusion that we have now got nothing on the exclusion that those people faced. The racial history, as I say that, San Francisco, California generally, but San Francisco especially is untold and underappreciated um, in 360 degrees. Both from the standpoint of what Black people have meant to the history and development of that city and the state, but also what they faced. There's a great documentary about Willie Mays, and it was very jarring for some. It just dropped last year. It was very jarring for some to understand the level of discrimination, of racial violence that Willie Mays existed in that great liberal city, that great progressive city, I should say, of San Francisco. But progressiveness knows color. as much as we like to talk about institutions that don't know color, you know, the I don't know how many of those actually exist in reality. That one is definitely not one of those that don't know color. It knows color, and things that we and I could just give you a glimpse of my worldview. Um, Things that we idealize in this society have never had Black people, Black faces in consideration when those ideals were being developed and embraced. Um, they've never have, and to the degree that they've attempted to rectify that, it's been from the standpoint of extending ourselves on your behalf. So in as much and insofar as you prove to be and continue to develop and to demonstrate that you are worthy of that extension. We're not extending it to you because we're righting the wrong of excluding you in the first place. That your existence as a human being or the rights that are afforded generally for the sake of citizenship to the citizenry, and should therefore have been extended the entire time.
Mm,
And even the word extended should not be the word used because it's not an extension to treat an American as an American.
mm,
That's not extension. Extension is treating a European like an American. That's an extent. That's an extension.
mm,
Um, you know, uh, Someone from Portugal or the Philippines who still reside there. Not someone who is of that descent and is born and raised here.
mm,
That's not an extension. And so the idea of even that kind of vocabulary demonstrates the fact that this was never developed with us in mind. And so, my family has a history of engagement in the righting of those wrongs. What has been so-called activism, so termed activism, civil rights move. My mom has always bristled at the term civil rights and considers human rights. And I don't necessarily, I mean, I'm a little bit more cynical than her, I guess. But but at the, but I will say that the rights of citizenship
Yeah,
should extend to every citizen, and that shouldn't be a question.
yeah.
Um,
Let's no, thank you for that robust in-depth view of your background. And I'll tell you why that is important, because I think it leads us in a few ways. You said two things that kind of stuck out to me about your being in a liberal city, right? And that did not really necessarily exclude your some of these great figures in this city called San Francisco, probably one of the most liberal places you
on the
possibly
earth,
right. Probably right.
let alone the
Yeah, let
continent.
alone right. And then the fact that the prolification of white supremacy, you can't escape it in an environment, in a culture like that is the whole intent of it, to prop it up, right? And put it in your face that even a liberal city like San Francisco,
Right.
it's in your
And the fact
face that the
so
prolification of white supremacy, you was that me? Okay. So I think one
it
of the
was
things.
me. The problem that just happened was me. I was getting the
Okay,
YouTube link.
got it.
Sorry about that.
So no, that's fine. So I think that one of the things I want to bring up is speak about a little bit about your experience still in around your childhood. How were you raised at home to address the issue of injustice, racial injustice? Let's start with racial injustice and injustice as a whole, obviously. The mom that you had met your mom multiple times, and for those who don't know Jamal's mom, if you've met Jamal's mom, you understand what Jamal is in many ways. Um, you know, um, your mom was an activist, but I'm not going to steal your thunder and go to explain a little bit more of your mom's upbringing in San Francisco at the time, and then how that impacted you in your journey, even though like you would think that San Francisco is so liberal that you shouldn't have any challenge as a black person, right? You should just be scot-free and life is just beautiful. But yet still some of the most pivotal fights for civil liberties can find their place in San Francisco, the Bay Area, Berkeley, Oakland as a whole, that the whole Bay Area, right? And so, can you speak a little bit about that, your upbringing, your mom's activism, and how that impacted you along the way?
My mom joined CORE, Council on Racial Equality, when she was 15 years old and still in high school. Started to attend San Francisco State Black Student Union meetings before they were even called that. They were still the Negro Student Association, and she was not a student at yet. They changed the name to Black Student Union to directly engage Black struggle. Um, my mom didn't raise me specifically to wear um, like blackness as otherness on my sleeve. Never actually that to wear that at all. It wasn't something that she raised me to wear as otherness, but she did raise me to embrace it as beautiful and as valuable, as meaningful, just as every other racial, ethnic, social group has value implicitly, inherently, not based upon class, you know, socioeconomic station, um, but just as human beings and and the humanity, um, the beauty within humanity. And so my mom raised me to with that understanding, did not tolerate disrespect directed outwardly, not just stopping the disrespect directed inwardly, meaning toward our family. It wasn't exclusive to just us, our people, our family. It was respect as paramount.
Mm,
Um, but also, my mom raised me with knowledge of history, knowledge of social cultural movements through history, of the impact and influence of Black people globally, um, the value and contribution and innovations that stem from within our culture, social spaces. So much so that, I got in trouble as a kid in elementary school, middle school, and high school before I started realizing that the trouble wasn't what I said or when I said it. It was the fact that I said it to these people at that time. And so I was a teenager before I realized that. But I got in trouble because it seemed to be basic common knowledge and
Mm,
people that, and it's not basic or common at all. And in fact, the opposite, it's actively erased, which I did not understand. I thought that people saying things ignorantly just needed an adjustment, needed some information, needed some perspective. And 7, 8 years old, and teachers yelling at me, 11, 12 years old, and kids wanting to fight me, and 14, 15 years old, and kids crying over something that I said that I didn't say, you know, aggressively. It
mm,
was just, you know, actually that was a Black person that did that. It was something to that effect, and Jamal saying mean things to me, literally. That was what was said. I remember that like it was yesterday.
mm,
And I'm sitting there like, what? What'd I say? You know?
mm,
And the teacher looking at me didn't scold me on the Jamal said mean things to me thing, just kind of tried to like squash it. But more kind of looking at me like, okay, I really wish you wouldn't say this type of stuff to these people. They're not really ready to hear it, kind of thing. But San Francisco, you mentioned, my mom led by example.
mm,
Never she never sat still for disrespect, racial disrespect. You know, um, I had some classic racial experiences,
mm,
in the city of San Francisco. Classic, like, commonly depicted in film. We were we went to a diner and got refused service when I was a little kid. I was like 4, you know, and my mom just basically sat there. She didn't turn over the table or yell or storm out. She didn't cry. She just was like, just kind of said, loud enough for everybody in earshot, but not louder than that it's really disappointing that, you know, this proprietorship was choosing to be discriminatory,
mm,
you know, choosing to wait on everybody else except for us and just ignore us until we leave. And then she said something to the effect of that we will be leaving, so you're not going to be spitting in our food or anything crazy. Uh, so we'll go ahead and take our leave, but you know, just leave you with the fact and the distastefulness of this distasteful act.
mm,
While you go ahead and taste something and ignore it going on around you, you're not going to be able to do that. You're going to have to sit with this as we depart.
mm,
So, I grew up with and still continue to have, unwavering, unflinching respect for her. She was a member, founding member, one of or early members, anyways, first recruiting classes of the Black Panther Party. People ask me, they assume that because I say my mom was in the Black Panther, said I'm from Oakland. I'm not, shout out to Oakland, shout out to Oaktown,
shout out to Oakland.
man, man. My mom lives in Oakland now, but I never lived in Oakland. And then when they hear that, they think that she's part of the San Francisco Black Panthers, which she was, but she was part of
Mm,
Oakland Black Panthers before the San Francisco
mm,
Panthers
wow.
existed. And so, that's a good kind of nutshell, I guess, version.
Well, there you go. Get that history right.
No question. That's a full-time job.
Get that history right. We were there in the beginning.
Yeah,
In
yeah, she was, she was
the beginning.
16 years old, 16 years old, you know.
Wow.
Um, the young man, Bobby Hutton, who was
Mm,
assassinated by the police. My mom told me his story as a child and talked about how he was so young. You know, he was a week older than her. Their birthdays are separated by 1 week.
mm,
And so she, I didn't realize that she was as young as she was until I started doing, the documentary I'm doing right now and the other things that I'm working on. And I started finding out more details.
Mm,
Um, you
mm,
know, I looked up his birthday and, the internet and, you know, April 21st and my
mm,
mom's April 28th. I'm like,
mm.
tell me my whole life how he was so young and he was, and it was tragic. And, but she talks about it like he was her little brother. I'm like, he's older than you.
You was the same age.
Yeah,
Yeah,
essentially, that
yeah,
1 week is meaningful.
yeah, yeah. We're gonna claim that. We're gonna claim that.
Good playing that week.
Gonna claim that. Can you speak to, we're gonna jump into, I'm gonna jump forward a little bit. Let's speak a little bit about, on the same theme of San Francisco, activism, your mom. You recently did work with Danny Glover, if I'm getting it right. The famed Danny Glover, who's actually from San Francisco as well. And can you speak a little bit about this as a filmmaker? How you came about this particular work and why is it so meaningful to you, and why do you think many more should watch or at least get a chance to see this project when it comes up?
Yeah, Danny Glover, not Donald Glover.
No, no,
People,
not that guy. Yeah,
not
Danny.
Childish Gambino. Shout out
Not
to
Childish
him.
Gambino.
I haven't had a chance to work with him yet, but no, Danny. Uh, Man, where to start? We still are working together. If I haven't done anything to blow it yet, so hopefully, as of now, it's still continuing collaboration. Working on a documentary about the best way to describe it, student movements at San Francisco State, which is also another level of history that's largely untold. I watched a documentary CNN on 1968. It's called 1968. It's on HBO Max available.
1968. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
they talk about the things, the highlights of that year, which, Democratic National Convention incidents were very famous. Martin Luther King was assassinated that year. 1968 was very significant. They also talk about a couple of different student movements that took place that year, but they don't mention San Francisco State at all. And that's very ironic because San Francisco State was the largest and longest student-led strike in the history of this country.
Hmm.
And yet it went unmentioned. Ronald Reagan was mentioned in that 68 documentary. He was a governor of California at the time. Ronald Reagan was directly involved and a direct antagonist to that movement. And yet they mentioned him, mentioned student movements in general, and didn't mention that. And I think that's for a reason. I think that's on purpose.
Hmm.
And the reason is the same reason why you see books being banned across this society and so-called DEI being under attack. And forgive me if you're watching this and you're a conservative, and so the only thing you've heard about DEI is that it's the big bad wolf that needs to be eradicated at all costs. DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. It doesn't stand for big bad wolf. Those are different consonants and sequence. So, you know, the reality is the erasure of inclusiveness is what I was talking about earlier. It's this is a raising of exclusiveness, of exclusion, of you know, restoration of like some type of de facto segregation. Um, what the reason why that's taking place in short, so as not to retread ground that, maybe has been tread or maybe hasn't enough. We saw a global movement in protest on behalf of justice a few years ago.
Hmm.
Um, the kind of culmination of the Black Lives Matter, if you would, the Black Lives Matter era,
Yeah.
if you will, kind of the culmination of that. But aside from that, it was bolstered and by more than just that, right? It was by people recognizing injustice when they see it. and feeling connection, solidarity with with the struggle at hand and feeling the need to get involved. And what you've seen in the aftermath from the the assailment of so-called critical race theory to this current assailment of so-called DEI and
Mhm.
everything other in between is to make certain that that type of coalescence doesn't occur again.
Mm.
You know, in the San Francisco State movement, you had a movement that stretched across the entire city. The Black Student Union started something that the other student groups got involved in. The teachers union got involved in. The longshoremen's union got involved in. You know, and communities from Chinatown to Hunters Point. And if you know the geography of San Francisco at all, you understand that that's a diametrical, diagonal sweep across the city,
Yeah.
right? And you know, you understand that that would obviously include a brush fire like that, a wildfire like that would include every community in between. It was massive, the largest and longest in history.
Mm.
Month of January, 400 people were arrested.
Mm.
That's called that look back upon. It's called the mass busts era.
Mm.
So, and that was obviously meant to break this strike coming out of the winter break, right?
Mm.
You know, the school had been closed. We got to get this thing reopened. You know, you have a governor who has national, federal aspirations, and how you just had the Black Panthers march on the state
Mhm.
capitol that year or the year before.
We didn't like that.
And so now you got these Black student union, these Black folks in San Francisco wilding out, and you start feeling like, how am I gonna convince these people to run me for president if they think I can't control the Negroes in my backyard? Blackyard, I almost said.
Mhm.
I
Like
can't
it.
control the black yard,
Yeah.
right? My backyard.
Mm.
So, so they went, all out. You know, Ronald Reagan was quoted as saying that the school needs to be open, even if we need to do it with bayonets.
Mm.
He wanted to put these kids, teenagers, early 20 somethings, he wanted to put them on the points and the ends of bayonets, posted snipers on the roofs of the school.
Mm.
So, well, you have this really contentious, hotly contested action, and yet it doesn't even warrant a mention. Why? Because we want to make certain that that kind of thing never occurs again. We're not trying to inspire the youth to see themselves in each other's struggle. We want to see division. We want to see dispersity. You know what I mean? Not diversity.
Mm.
Dispersity. We want you, go your separate ways.
Separate ways.
I had a one of our interviewees, and I could wrap this response here,
Hmm.
say something on the first phone pre-interview. Didn't know me from Adam. She brought up she's a Chinese lady, Dr. Lorraine Chu. She's interviewed in the PBS documentary series, The Chinese Americans, and she was arrested for her actions during the San Francisco State student movement.
Mm.
Grew up in Chinatown in San Francisco, very
Mm.
isolated, immigrant parents, didn't speak the language well enough to really know enough of why their daughter would be getting involved with some black kids and not going to class.
Go to class and
You
get
know
your
what I mean?
education. Yeah,
You
come on
know,
now.
I ain't seen you do homework in a month. What's going on? You know? And she felt like she was a part of something bigger than just herself and
Mm.
inspired her to get involved. She told me that she understood that the Asian model minority stereotype was created as a means to divide Asian kids from black kids. I didn't ask her that. She
Mm.
volunteered that. I didn't volunteer it. She's like, we know who our enemy is and why they're our enemy to us.
Mm.
So, and I say that, I know that's incendiary. It's important to understand what the scripture means when it says that we battle against spiritual wickedness in high places.
Mm.
And the enemy resides, you know, wickedly, spiritually in a high place. And and I talk about the governor of the state assigning and spinning
mm,
propaganda publicly that some kids need bayonets so that they will stop asking for educational equity. I mean, that's not insane to you. That's insane to me.
mm,
It's definitely wicked.
right. Mm, mm. Kind of what you just said there is the insanity and how absurd the whole thing is, right? People are asking for equity, equality, in these spaces, and this the struggle. You say 19, what was that, 1968, right? We're here in 2025, and it seems like not much has changed, right? Right. And then we find ourselves in almost 50 plus years later, right? And counting, that we still find ourselves in similar struggles. I want to pivot a little bit here. You mentioned the scriptures, the spiritual battles, the spiritual warfare. I think when we look at the framing of discrimination, racism, um, at the core of it, I truly believe, yes, there is human culpability. Yeah, that's human beings making certain choices. But I really also see it as demonic activity, um, to demean a person, to reduce them and put them below the imago Dei, the image of God by which we were created. To strip a human of its imago Dei is the image of God, by the image of God at which we've been created, whether by rightly coming out and just telling them that they're not humans, mistreating them, um, you know, taking certain rights from them that dehumanizes them. In a way, it is an affront on that person and their spiritual, emotional, and physical well-being. And so I think you framed this in the context of spiritual warfare. Let's talk a little bit about your background on how today we're speaking about this wisdom that we can ascertain in this time and reflecting on Black history. And I know that, a lot of African Americans and Black people living around the world globally have a strong affinity towards God or some type of higher being, and you don't meet a lot of Black atheists, not every day. Like there are some, but not a whole lot. They're gonna subscribe to some type of spirituality or something. I think it's almost like I had a friend from San Francisco. His name was Malcolm. We used to go to church together with him, and he was a San Francisco kid too. And we used to talk about how Black people have an affinity to God, now which God sometimes they can become a debate, but there's that spirituality and that foundation and a lot of the experience, not just in Americas but globally as well. To that end, I want you to speak a little bit about your journey faith, your faith in your journey in faith. How did you come to to know Christ and to have a relationship with him? Because your background is kind of interesting too. You did not come from necessarily like this heavily church background where like people just assume Black people of a certain age, y'all just went to church, like like
From San
and
Francisco.
yes, yeah. You're like,
I
that's what
thought
y'all are doing,
I always
right?
like that.
So speak to that a little bit about some of the misconception around you know uh, the association between church and Black history and the Black experience. you know, um, it might not be actually normal for everyone. A lot of people had that experience, but it's not normal for everyone. But yet, still, you found yourself in this place where you came to know Christ, even though that was necessarily a background. Can you speak a little bit about that and that how that informed your view of spiritual warfare as it relates to um, discrimination, racial discrimination?
Wow. Okay. That's quite a question. Um,
Sorry.
no, no, no. It's let's see how I could respond to that succinctly. I definitely, you know, I think the spiritual aspect of it, you talk about spiritual warfare specifically, I think is a good way to kind of approach this in a way that will bring connectivity to what could seem like disparate topics.
Mhm.
Um, I've always felt that I was being protected and led by God. I always felt like I was going to be okay. There was a lot of things that, made me very fearful as a child, neighborhoods, schools, and the kids from different neighborhoods. um, just as a quick example, I told a lot of people that knew me from my 20s are under the impression because I told them that I didn't play high school basketball. It's not exactly true. I did. We had a very short season because we joined the league my sophomore year. I played on the team, um, but only like maybe halfway through the season, we got in a massive team fight,
Mm,
and we got kicked out of the league. And so after that, it was just rec ball until like 6, 7 years later, they joined the main league in the city, and I was the coach
mm,
of that team. But when I talk about things making you afraid, I didn't really engage the fight like that, and some people feel a way about it. It's a true story though. I kind of walked through, if you're familiar with Bugs Bunny cartoons, you see
mhm,
our like uh Bowfinger with Eddie Murphy. I kind
mm,
of walked through like walking through traffic. I didn't actually end up getting hit. And the reason why is because the school we were fighting is actually from the neighborhood I lived in.
mm,
The school in a different part of the city. I lived in the Fillmore,
mm,
and I went to school in the Sunset. And a lot of my classmates were from Lakeview, which was across town. The Sunset was in between and actually more toward that side. So kind of like 2/3 of the way. Um, and so, uh, so those guys, they all were banding together, and we were on their court. The Fillmore, we were up the hill from my house, my apartment, at playing in their gym, and we got in a fight. And so this whole thing turned into like a melee with like us against the world or whatever. But I was really not a part of any world. I was by myself, and so like um it's like nobody really got like, jumped or anything like that, or I had to intervene. It was kind of one-on-ones and a bunch of people chasing, and then, our coaches and the refs kind of hustled us out of the gym. But nobody took a swing at me. So I wasn't forced to respond to anything like that, and I just kind of walked from the basket where the fight started to the exit where they were ushering us. And, somehow I talk about being protected. I just kind of walked through there like I was in some invisible bubble and stood outside. And some of my teammates try to like, you know, get on my case for not getting hit. I was like, why are you mad at me? Because nobody punched me. That's kind of odd, isn't it? But no, I didn't get hit. But I wasn't going to start it with somebody who I live nearby, and they were going to catch me alone away from them. They were all going to be together when they saw them, and so I had to go home. I saw the guys from the other team on the bus like later that week, and they were kind of like staring at me like, was that one of them? But they weren't exactly sure. So I didn't do anything. So I rode the bus, you know, nerve-wracked the whole time, and found a different bus route after that. Um, and so, but it was just a function of kind of being, I went to school outside of my neighborhood, and so I wasn't that close to them as they were to each other. And then I didn't go to school within my neighborhood, so I wasn't as close to them as they were with each other either. But, I did feel like And I've always felt, and I wasn't a Christian, and I didn't, believe in Christianity, but I did believe that God was with me and leading me. Um, when I started to go to church, I got really heavily involved because I wanted to suss it out if it was a real thing or not. I studied intently, late at night, the Bible, about concordance, um, read books on the faith, by historic writers. I read Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I read C.S. Lewis. Anything I could get my hands on, anybody would recommend. I really kind of spent my non-basketball hours hanging out in a Christian bookstore, um, the way I used to hang out in the library. And so when I got to a certain point, um, there was a mentor of mine whose brother was on the board of a youth organization, national organization that had a chapter in the city called World Impact, and he had been recommending me to join that place for years, and I always dismissed it. I had no interest in doing that. But then this one particular day, I felt like spiritually grabbed up by the collar. And you had to understand, I was going to a church that is very conservative denominationally. They didn't really believe in supernatural, dynamic, spiritual experiences. It was all about like reason and intellectual dissection, hermeneutical study and, homiletical study and, you know, orthopraxy. It's
Praxi, baby.
Calvinist. You know what I'm saying? Shout out to the Calvinists. Uh, they, they study.
Reform.
You understand me? Reform. Your lazy, non-reading self and behavior. That's what they stand for. You know what I mean? You're gonna learn today. KRS-One. Uh, so but I I I started to really come across people who were from more charismatic sides of things. And I always knew, like I could feel it, before they would even say. I was like, you go to a charismatic church, you speak in tongues? And they'd be like, invariably, they'd be like, yeah, I do. Some of them will laugh at me for bringing it up, because they understood that God was doing something. And so it's caused me to have a larger view of a greater God than what I would have had if I had just gone to the church of my family members or something and, believed the way that people have believed for generations. Instead, I've had an opportunity to go to a great cross section of churches and sit with a great cross section of followers of the faith, and to hear their perspectives and experiences and to share mine and be able to compare notes whenever I've gotten to the place of feeling comfortable, like I had this thing figured out, you know, whoever was leading the organization would be called away, or I would be called away, and you have to start that whole process over. Um, and so I've had to rethink. And then I went to school for anthropology, and I got really challenged in the fundamentals of my beliefs, sometimes directly by professors or classmates, cohort members. Um, I was in biological anthro my final year, and I promise you, I'm not exaggerating. Those kids in that class, they were looking forward to seeing me on Monday so they could tell me some new thing they thought up to finally get my goat or whatever. I didn't know I had goats that need to be got, but them dudes was like on a mission. They were I pro I, you know, I'm not gonna waste time talking about it too much. We talk about it another time, I suppose, but or not. But I really came during that season to value Sundays in preparation for Monday. In that, you need to spend this time being charged up in your spirit, being built up, you know, in order to face what you have to face. And it wasn't even about like the questions and the commentary or whatever, because debates or whatever, I could get with that. It's like you say this, I say that, it's whatever. But the whole energy drain of constantly being scrutinized and attacked and assailed and lampooned, I told a kid, this is an example, so I could wrap this up. I told a kid and that the question was, should parents be involved in the subject matter of their kids' education?
Mm,
And I said, of course, the parents who love them should know what's being told to them by the teachers who don't.
mm,
And I said it just like that, and that really offended them, the students in the class.
mm,
So fast forward like 2 weeks later, and this person had been sitting on this the whole time. Little did I know, the subject was about 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 healthcare.
mm,
And see, you got to understand, man. I'm at UCLA, and anthropology is not really a big black discipline in an institution that's not really a big black institution. You understand me? PWI. You understand me? Predominantly white institution in a predominantly white discipline. All right. So I was minoring in Black Studies, and so like my Black Studies classes, you had a lot more Black kids. Probably most of the Black kids on the campus
On campus there.
were around each other, interacting with each other to whatever degree. But in my anthropology classes was is the opposite. And so there was one other Black person in that class. And I say that to say I'm talking about healthcare. Our exposure, our experience, the availability of healthcare is much different. And I was trying to make a point about as which is not relevant to these people. Or I was trying to make a point about the other socioeconomic classes, let alone the races, social spaces, have a lot more of a relationship to getting second opinions versus, sometimes for black people, underclasses, I hate that term. I don't know a better one. Uh, it's getting an opinion at all.
Mhm,
And so I was trying to say, well, you don't necessarily need to take the word of the doctor. And I was going to give an example of Martin Luther King Hospital that black people at the time were calling Killer King.
mm,
Because, this lady had died in the lobby of that hospital in Los Angeles, a major metropolitan city.
mm,
At the time, the number one superpower on the earth, right? And she died in the hospital. And,
mm,
probably some issue with her insurance. That was 15 years ago. It's hard to recall. But I was trying to get to that point, and I just said that you don't necessarily should necessarily take the opinion of the doctor. And the student chimes in. Of course, you should take the opinion of the doctor who has a degree. Using my same cadence, trying to weaponize
organizing against.
my syntactical style against me. Uh, and I looked around and I was like, oh, that's what I didn't know I was in this conversation. And I didn't even finish my thought, you know? Uh, and so that was an example of like 1 week, in that class where it was constantly every week, you know. But the result after all of that, kind of, emotional taxing experience, emotionally
Mm,
taxing experience. One of my classmates who hadn't said a word to me the whole quarter kind of
mm,
ran behind, chased me down in the hallway to bring up something I said months prior. And we ended up having a 2-hour conversation about the faith,
mm,
you know. Um, and you realize that, you know, light and momentary afflictions are purchasing away the glory that far surpasses all of it, right?
mm,
And something happens and you go, that I'd go through that 100 times. That
mm,
was, at the time when you're going through it, it's like, I cannot believe that I have to deal with this. This is, it's beating me down. But at the end of it, and you see what comes of it, and you go, that's all I had to do,
mm,
And so spiritually, I see the world through a vocabulary that was born in those moments through that journey.
that journey.
And when I look at things and the way people interpret it, I think it's a function of having a God that's too small,
Mm,
not having been challenged on the things you take for granted. I
mm,
was blessed to be challenged in that way.
mm. That's a beautiful journey, Jamal. I think that one of the things I've loved about your story is your the authenticity of your faith. Getting having known you for more than 20 years, and and then like it's funny though. It's like, how am I going to explain it? So we feel like God doesn't like culture. That God has this thing like he's called the God of the nations for a reason, right? And that
Right,
he wants all people, all ethnos to come to him.
right,
What I've always loved about you is that you never fell into the pressure of denying your blackness or your culture or your heritage at the expense of some like weird cultural American Christianity of some sort, right? You're American, yeah. I'm not saying I'm American, but within the culture and the tradition that you come from, it's like you understood and you saw God in it, how God moved and worked through that in and through your life, and that is something that is quite commendable. Because it's funny, like I know you're one of my closest friends that I know has really a very critical mind in looking and dissecting issues in culture, issues of race, gender, issues of religion, even some of the hypocrisy within the church. But yet still, you haven't lost and you didn't get jaded about your faith and your interaction with the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And I think that's commendable because it's easy to get cynical. It's to get like, I'm not saying you haven't had cynical moments or pessimistic moments. We all have those moments. Like, what am I even? What is this? Like, um. So, but overall, I'm for those who are watching this right now. I'm testifying to this man's character because I've known him for a long time, and for those of us who've known him, that that's who he is. It's like he's gonna let you know, like, what really matters, and always very introspective on the things. And I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for the way you were raised. I'm grateful for the fact that as you grew up as an adult, like you kind of retained those values, right? And you didn't let anybody. And then obviously the fact that you were being shaped by God, and those encounters with God is one of the things that I think has kind of given you that staying power over these years, right? I haven't seen so much. We've all seen different things over time in the communities that we come from and that you come from as well. And I think that's quite commendable. Can you speak a little bit to the place of faith in our struggle, um, as people of faith, as people of faith, and most importantly, people of color? Where is faith? What can we hold on to? I mean, what we're looking at the world right now. If you say anything, some people will say you're woke. If you say this, some people say you are too sensitive. If you say that, they'll say probably you're not even a Christian. There's a lot of things out there in the world today. How can we frame our where we are today in the context of like our faith, and how can faith be a defining thing for us in this struggle?
Yeah, great question again. Okay, there's a couple of things that I could say to that. You mentioned the cultural thing, and I think that relates to this, the idea that God somehow must hate culture. Um, right? And that relates to this kind of thing you were saying just now. Woke was the other thing I forgot when I said critical race theory and DEI. Wokeness
Wokeness. Yes.
was definitely in the crosshairs.
Yes. Yes.
DEI is a new woke. It's funny
Yes.
these things turn over really quickly this era. That
Hmm.
when orange was a new black, it was such for like a good 5 years. But woke was the new critical race theory, and it seemed like it was only that for maybe 15 to 18 months. And
Hmm.
now DEI has supplanted it all. But anyway,
Hmm.
my one of my favorite and most impactful passage of scriptures, Romans 12:2, be no longer be not conformed to the patterns of the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. And the idea that, being able to test and approve God's will, it at first it was just a really beautiful idea,
Hmm.
the idea of a different type of closeness to God.
Hmm.
When it comes out of verse one, which is to offer yourself as living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God, right?
Hmm.
So, then to be, no longer conformed, but be transformed. And we always talk about transformation. We have
Hmm.
vocabulary of transformation in the faith, but renewing of your mind is not, and the
Hmm.
patterns of this world is not something we really talk about, and I think that we kind of vaguely associate culture with the pattern of this world, but
Hmm.
no. So here's
Hmm.
some bad news. Here's some
Hmm.
bad news. The idea that we're supposed to abandon our culture is really more closely associated with colonialism, colonization. The same processes that erased language and tradition and individual personhood from the nations that were robbed and plundered of their human resources and their populations. Um, the Spanish Inquisition brought about that sort of like torturous conversion. And and I say that it's more closely associated with that, more closely derived from that experience, from that behavior, that practice,
Hmm.
because we exist even in our multicultural so-called spaces, in our non-denominational so-called spaces. We exist in white spaces, and that sort of expectation of transformation of your cultural adherence, and even adherence might seem like the wrong word, but I'm using it for the sake of whatever positive or negative may exist within that approach or practice. That expectation of disengagement of your cultural adherence is meant for the sake of adherence to this new culture. And this is not a kingdom culture. It's a Caucasian, a European, Western civilization derived culture,
Hmm.
which is generally invisible to us and they, because it's treated as normalized, as greater, as universal. These things are not considered to be culture. They're not considered to be segmented or other. They're considered to be baseline. It's like why
Hmm.
I could grow up in the West, in the Bay, and think I don't have an accent.
Hmm.
Everybody I know talks like me, right? My wife, who's also from San Francisco, but Chinese American, um, was listening to one of my records at one point, and she goes, "You have an accent. What accent is that?" Right? This is adorable. But me being me, uh, she goes, "You have an accent. What accent is that?" I just said, "I'm from the West, same city as you."
Hmm.
But I knew what she meant. But it's invisible generally because it's normal to us and it's normalized. And so, while we're drawing as Americans, as Westerners, and I say we, you know, the royal we. uh, we're doing that. The expectation when we're being told to be transformed, no longer be conformed,
mm,
is that we're gonna somehow assimilate.
mm,
That not that we're going to remove the the um, the hindrances to godly connection.
mm,
You know, so we kind of conflate these things. You get what I'm saying? I feel like this
mm.
thing has been so under spoken of, so under discussed, under taught that I feel like I need to be so expansive, but I'm going to
Yeah.
resist that. So your culture is your vocabulary of expression.
Mm,
It's your connection to the journey that you've been drawn through. Let me say that again. It's your connection to the journey that you've been drawn through. Meaning, if you erase all of that history of movement that brought you to such a time as this, as we like to say, then you erase all that work transgenerationally that God has done. We're told in scripture that he determined the exact places we should live.
mm.
So if he determined that, then it means there's meaning to that.
That's right.
It has to mean that. What else would it mean? Why would he determine that if such a thing as that? Why would he care if it was just meant to be erased and eradicated on behalf of being swallowed and encapsulated within
Right.
this European movement of history? Like, why would that be the case? You know, Simon the Zealot was called Simon the Zealot to this day. The Zealots wasn't a biblical scriptural, I mean, I guess in a way it was. They were zealous for the kingdom of God and
Mhm.
its form of Israel, right? But that's not why they were called that. The Zealots were, misguided in terms of what they thought the coming Messiah was about, to a degree.
Mm.
But they didn't stop calling him that. They said, you can't be Simon the Zealot no more.
Mm.
You understand me? That's not what, Peter got a new name, but it wasn't for the reasons we generally think.
Mm.
These people's background, they're always being called the sons of Zebedee, John and James, right? Um, they're constantly being referred to that way.
Mm.
You know? The legacy and the history is meaningful. We're given endless lists of genealogies. It feels endless,
Yeah.
and even the Christ is this has an entire lineage dissected. Why? So if we're just supposed to just divest in everything that brought us here, that's not what that means. That's not what the patterns of the world means. The patterns of the world refer to the fact that there's more bad news. Most people vote according to their demographic, their socioeconomic class. We act like we vote according to scripture.
Mm.
The vast majority of people that vote according to whichever party that they're loyal to, they would vote whether they step foot inside of a church
Oh
before or
my.
since ever. They would vote the exact same way. What is different about you in terms of your ideology, worldview, point of view because of your faith? Well, I don't cuss as much. You know what I'm
Mm.
saying? Like this is superficial. So when we talk about transformation, you're talking about spiritual maturity.
Mm.
We don't have a vocabulary for that.
Mm.
And so most people actually haven't experienced that transformation.
Mm.
I would hate to say, but dare to say,
Mm.
because we don't really have I think that many people who have experienced such a transformation were drawn into that transformation, not through their own effort, endeavor, or engagement. They were drawn into it through the Spirit of God and the grace of God, and they happened upon it. Happened upon experiences where they could not escape it, where those circumstances demanded a level of maturity that had to be sought out. And shout out to those people, that soldiered through that. Shout out to those people that embraced it, you know, because it's dark. It's dark out here. We don't have a lot of light illumination when it comes to what it means to be transformed, what it means to be able to test and approve what God's will is. See, that's why I put my finger up and said then, because
Mm,
until then, you can't.
mm,
We always know in part on this side of heaven, but
yeah.
being led by God, there's a dynamic, and there's a dynamic difference between God moving you and pressing upon you, God leading you.
Mm.
There's a dynamic difference, and I say that from
It's a lot.
experience, from the experience of having been, led. We were told when we moved here to LA, I was told that we should leave on September 20th. My roommate wanted to leave earlier because he wanted to get down here so we could start figuring out, simple things like where we're going to live, where we're going to work.
Mm,
My girlfriend at the time, who's my wife now,
mm,
wanted to leave later, do
mm,
simple things like where we're going to live,
mm.
where we're going to work. God said September 20th. And keep in mind, I came from a church that didn't even believe that you could hear God like that. It's very specific.
Very specific. No wiggle room.
You know what I mean? And I had the two of them both in my ear, people that I trust, you
Mm,
know? And I'm gonna grossly offend the other one if I listen to one of them,
mm,
right? And no, we're not doing that. We're doing this. He said the 20th. We're going on the 20th. September 19th, after like 6 something PM, someone called up and said that we have a place that you guys could be able to stay. Now my
mm,
girlfriend, she had a place already. She had a place. She was gonna room with some of the ladies from the church or whatever. They had a room for her to come in, and at the apartment she could come in and rent. Us dudes,
nothing like that.
a struggle. I mean, we was about to get on the bus in the morning. So she wasn't worried about herself. She was worried about me.
Mm.
How you gonna move to Los Angeles? You don't even know where you're gonna live. What are you gonna do when you get off the bus?
You're gonna
You gotta
start
get
bumping
off
up
the
the
bus. You
skid.
can't stay there.
Go off the bus to Skid Row.
Right. You know what I'm saying? The bus is already down there, so that'd have been easy.
You
But
might as well just.
and so, she wept when I told her that,
Mm,
because she was so worried. And, maybe seemingly foolishly, I was not because I knew what I heard. I knew this is a difference between
mm,
being pressed and moved or led.
mm,
And I'm not saying that, you're talking about faith and being of color as well. I'm in this industry and, it's probably the worst time in history, and for this industry, and the history of it. But a lot of people come here because God, led them to come here some kind of way. They felt like God moved them to come here, told them to come here. And and I'm not disputing that.
mm,
I'm in this business because I was led this way. And I could say more about that, but I just yesterday had a recognition of a person saying I was born for this. And I'd always cringed at that. Always like, we're born to serve God. We're not born for this work. But it just hit me, we are born to do into the earth to do the things that God has prepared for us to do on the earth. There's scripture that says that too, you know,
mhm.
to do the works for which Christ Jesus has prepared for me,
Mhm.
to take hold of that for what I've been called heavenward, what God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. There's a lot of things that speak about the things that God took a hold of us for, on behalf of, do the work that God has taken hold of, Christ took a hold of me to do. So, but it didn't really resonate until yesterday. Um, but I would say, maybe as a warning, man, you might be King David in the joint. He might be calling you to drive away the Amalekites in Hollywood. It's not likely. And I understand that God is not likely, but, you know, I would venture to say, and another, final round of bad news, you should probably, take less of a view of yourself. Like, man,
mm,
man, you might be a little bit overinflated in your view of yourself.
mm,
God's probably not calling you to change this thing.
mm,
You've been told scripturally that it's going to get worse.
mm,
And you think it's going to transform back the other way. Like, I know scripture says this, but me, I'm doing the other thing because God wants me to do it. Why? Why has God called you to operate against his grand plan for history? That's, we should start there. Secondly, put in, what I think it actually is. I think putting your hand to the plow and not looking back
mm,
is not thinking to ourselves that because this thing is a struggle more than I thought it was going to be, that maybe I should be doing something else.
mm.
You've been given this farm, and it may
Okay.
not even be for your sake of appreciation, enjoyment, or beneficial reaping. You know, I know that's not a word,
Mm,
but you get me.
mm,
It may not
mm,
be for your personal benefit. It may be for the benefit of the continuing journey that you're not supposed to erase.
mm,
Culture is important because that's where we just establish tradition. We establish rites of passage. Rites is the same root word as ritual. Those
mm,
things that allow us to break out of this imprisonment of the moment into the greater perspective, into the connection with the spirit of God, with the direction and leadership of his spirit, and where our spirits become alive instead of our flesh. We are constantly engaging these bodies, but our spirit is engaged through ritual, right?
mm,
And so as we divest from ritual, we lose connection, right? And this disconnection is left in a vacuum. You're not finding God in that place of disconnection, I promise you.
mm,
So, this is a simple mathematic of not reinventing the wheel. While we are so busy trying to prove that we're so Christian that we don't need to be engaged or involved or connected or knowledgeable of our culture or cultural history.
mm,
So you out here lugging stuff instead of rolling it
mm.
because your grandfather actually invented a means to an end that
And
you
then,
need. But you trying to prove to the other folks who are not related to you, who don't have your best interest in mind, who don't have love for you to that degree, that you don't need those other people that do. That's a work of the devil, bro. Um, and it relates to the one that's taking place in the school. It's this disconnect and this societally disconnect that you could observe through the entertainment industry, this worshiping of youth, this privileging of it, this idea that, and listen, shout out to the youth, and not hating on that, I'm not saying this because I got gray in my beard. That's not my point. But the worshiping of it, the idealization of youthfulness,
mm,
um, is a devaluing, a desecration, a dismissal of age and wisdom. Of
mm,
the benefit of a previously invented wheel. Right? I cannot manipulate the masses if they're connected to the elders in the community that could tell
mm,
they've seen this okey doke already. Don't
mm.
fall for that. Okay. Remember that commercial? Is it State Farm? It's one of the insurance company commercials. Old dude with the fishing jacket, vest
Yep.
on. He's got a pole, and an Asian girl. He's holding $1. He's like, "Oh, it's $1," right? Right. Now she had, her aunties, her grandmas, to tell her, "Hey, man, that's just $1. You don't need to dance for that." Right? She over here swiping, right? And he's like, "Oh, you got to be faster than that," right? I love that commercial, by the way. It's hilarious.
Mm,
But you're disconnected, you're isolated, alone, and now you're struggling. Maybe you're hungry. Maybe it's a vending machine nearby, and you just need $1 because they don't take credit cards. And this dude is holding it on a fishing line. He got you dancing. You know, that connection, that greater connection keeps you from falling into that. You know, it's a stupid example, but you get me. It's the idea that you're being led into something that's for your destruction, not your benefit.
Mm,
You know what I mean? And so that I learn, I yearn, I wish for greater understanding of the things that my elders and ancestors already knew. You know,
mm,
the benefit of it. And I'm not talking about ancestral worship. I'm talking about that, you know, so many words become dirty words.
yeah,
And I think, again, I think it's demonic, you know, the idea that you can't even say that without having to have a proviso.
yeah.
But I yearn for the things that they knew. You know, these
Mm,
lessons were hard earned.
mm.
You know, they travel long and far
To get those
to
knowledge and those
accomplish
get
that. You know
yeah.
what I mean? And the we're far, far removed trying to recapture the unity that they had. You know, this has been a long answer to a short question. I'll just say this. As I do this documentary, and I learn from these older men and
Mm,
women about what they fought for and why they fought so hard for it. You know, I had a minor degree in Black Studies, as I said. I would not have faced sniper fire to get that degree.
mm.
I could have kept it. I promise. If you'd put a gunman on the roof, I would stay home that day. I stayed home for less. You know what I'm saying?
I'm not going to school today.
I got anxiety. I got butterflies in my stomach. My stomach hurt. I'm not going to school.
Not today. I'm not trying to die.
Got stress. You feel me? I want to live. I could
I'm
read this on my
not trying to die.
own. Library is free.
The devil is a liar.
But they were willing to endure that. Why? They will tell you that Black Studies was not about the tower educational escape. You know what I mean? It was about developing problem solvers. This is a quote, developing problem solvers on behalf of the community.
Mm,
And so that's what it existed for. They connected the students to the community and vice versa.
mm,
I understood from that statement that if it's not that, if it's not about that, then what are you doing as an educational institution
mm,
by scholarshiping or enticing the best and brightest away from the community and then funneling them away into institutions that are bent on the community's destruction?
mm,
You know, what are you actually doing? So why is it, or what does it mean to have faith as a person of color? It's the understanding that you're not being squired away from your people.
mm,
You know, you're being enriched and imbued with the light of the world for your people's betterment,
mm,
right? And those people in your family line who also bore that cross, for the sake of being a succinct, who bore that cross in the past, did that so that you could do it, right? Punishing to the third and fourth generation, the children of those who sin against him, but blessing to what? 1,000 generations, the descendants of those who love him.
mm,
So you understand you carry that mantle, you even in this faith at all. Like I didn't grow up in a Christian home, but I benefited from believing people in my family line that the faith found me, the grace of God found me, sought me out.
mm,
Those of us who come to real faith, we understand that the grace of God sought us out.
mm,
But he sought me out in a place where I was, being oriented against them actively,
mm,
daily, constantly.
mm,
Found out that there was evangelists and church planners, church builders in my family history. My mom does a lot of genealogical work. Now she's a part of the African American Genealogical Society in her later years.
mm, mm.
I tell you, my mom's a queen.
Yeah.
You didn't realize.
Hmm.
Change because eras change and we're not a civil rights era no more. So that queenness just takes a new function. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's important to celebrate those things too. because you understand the journey, such as we've been discussing, right? And I found out through her work that the things that I do and that I'm oriented toward, the things that come intuitively to me, the seeds of those things were planted in my double helix, you know, 40, 50, 60 to 70 years prior. That's why it exists there. That's why, you know, that's why I vibe with that.
Mm.
You understand me? So why am I a man of faith and I have decades in this journey because there were men and women of faith who put in work in the
And
kingdom
February.
generations prior.
Mm.
And so while we trying to erase ourselves from that backstory, that's why we flounder and are lost.
Mm.
That's why we don't find transformation. You think
Mm.
that that's transformation? It's not. That's indoctrination. That's more colonization. Sorry.
Mm. Mm. I think they what you just shared there is so poignant because one of the things that I would say is we and I think you answered it very beautifully. I think the concept of continuity, legacy is important to God because that's how God actually sees humanity generationally. So when God says, I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, he's giving you this framing that he's not just the God of Abraham, but his lineage, right? And then you could say that Christ came from the came through the loins of King David, that
Hmm.
legacy, right? That flows down through him in his genealogy. And that is a very unique thing, I think, when we think about that. And yet still we have forces at work that are trying to disassociate us from those particular legacies and that history and that collective knowledge so that we can just start from ground zero.
Hmm.
So there isn't anything that is knowledge that is passed on. It's just like you just here in this world just floundering trying to figure it out by yourself, right? Where the intel is already there for you to flourish, right? For you to do the things you have to do. And I think that's important that God even himself defined himself as, you know, that I'm, yesterday, today, and forever. So looking at themselves like yesterday, today, and then forever. And this whole concept of continuity,
Hmm.
the past, present, and the future.
Yeah.
And that is part of the story of scripture, and that I think that God wants us to mirror that as well. And that's why I think history is important in this time when people might want to say that potentially, like for instance, black history is um propping up some type of like bigotry against some other groups we're not going to mention, or that it's somehow CRT, that it's demeaning their existence in some type of like unmerited favor that you're giving to this other group of people. Why is their history and is in different? It's important to understand that, not to give into that. So anybody who's listening to this, I want to say something that it's important for you to learn the history. It's important for you to stay curious. It's for you to ask the questions. For those who still have living, parents, ask them. If you have grandparents, ask them questions. If you have elders in your area, ask them questions about their struggle. You might find out things that was not televised, right? The revolutions that they were part of that was never televised, or the things that they've done that are of consequence that you just didn't think about. And I think the same thing too is for all of us in where we are as well, to think about the same thing as well. Like there's things we've gone through, the things we've done. Sometimes we just brush past them as like, yeah. Maybe because we think that they were not big enough. Maybe we thought that maybe there was sometime like some type of like quasi accomplishment. But I think at the end of the day, we just celebrate those things and to let those who are coming behind us, for those who care, I guess, enough to know those things as well. And also being a student of documenting the history, whether the history in your family, whether it's it was something that someone got recently, and they said like they asked their parents. It was this book, and basically like they can write in their own history. Right. So like it can be an exercise to jog their memory where the book is like a blank book, and but it has like it's broken up into segments of their life. So they can write us in their childhood, and they can write things down, and it could be a project where could be something that they leave for their families. So that's just at a small micro level, but even at a macro level, she's thinking about the history that has been trying to be suppressed, and things that you're finding out every day. You're like, wow, these people did some amazing things in our history, and the way that somehow because of the insecurities of like you know um those who are propping up white supremacy would do to suppress that history, and rewrite the history is one of the things we have to fight against, and making sure that we are doing that because God wants us, because it's part of God's story as well. That's the other thing we don't understand, that
Right.
humanity's story is part of God. God is in the midst of those things. And so when we tell half stories and we just kind of tell it from one perspective, we're not doing it justice,
Right.
in terms of understanding the journeys that has brought us here. So whether you're African American, whether you're an African, whether you're from the Caribbean, whether you're from other like Black diasporic experience or cultural experience, it's important to kind of know some of those history, know the journey, and then the interconnectedness of some of those stories. Like sometimes we think like these things are just happening in silos, right? But yet still there's connectivity to it. I think with the advent of the internet and social media being so prevalent in our world today, I think one of the things that I see that is very unique is you quickly find out that, wow, I didn't know, people's like, I didn't know the connectivity between this particular part of the history and that other part of the history. Like, I was hearing something that Kendrick Lamar said, the rapper, was saying that, yo, like, even when you see us dance in the Bay Area, like a lot of that is like stuff that came from the South, and saying, or like even California culture as a whole, like what you see even what you see in LA, some of these cultural things he's talking about. He just spoke about a lot of people come from Louisiana, that connection back to um people that migrated all the way down into those parts. Or even when we're looking at African history, and I was running into some librarians recently, then with the Liberian story being like the what we call Americo librarians, which were like, former enslaved, individuals that moved in the 1850s into Liberia. And in we live here in the greater Trenton area, and is a huge Liberian population here, and a lot of them can still trace their families back to like, not, to North Carolina, to South Carolina, and like, it's very, very unique to see like they have this dual identity of like history of like their African American, ancestry, then connecting back to their African identity that they've just created over the last 200 plus years, right? And to see some of those interconnectedness is important for us to do that, because it's also telling that story. Even like church history for those who are of the faith, and like sometimes you just think like, oh, it's just those people over there that wrote the history of Christendom, right? But that this, even the nature of Christianity itself is not originally based in Europe. It's based outside of Europe, to be exact. And to see some of those things as well, for us to see and reclaim some of that history, and looking at it from that perspective as well. I think is important, because when you're setting certain legacies, when you're setting certain things in place, it's like, wow, I didn't, I didn't know these things to be true. There's something that I read recently, a very interesting article, and it was speaking about the famous Nigerian artist Fela. Fela's parents, Fela's dad, interestingly enough, was the first, I think the first, it must, maybe the first either in Nigeria or it's parts of West Africa to ever had black person to have a recording to record on like I think it was like 1910 or some crazy thing he had recorded music, and that's because he was a minister, right? And he was musically gifted and was classically trained. So he, by the missionary, taught him how to play instrument. But he started to come up with ways and started to write indigenous music. Well, the white Christian establishment in Nigeria at the time, this is like 1890s going into like the early 1900s, we're not having it. They were like, this dude is lost his mind. He got in trouble quite a bit, for a while, but he just kept on at it. And we talked about how his music and some of his evangelistic like crusades were so successful because the people will come out to hear the music that they were familiar with. We're talking about musical people. They were not going to hear some Western stuff that couldn't resonate with them. So his crusades were extreme. This is like history. This is Fella's dad, by the way. This is Fella, the world famous artist that came out later, and that he came from this kind of like history, right? That the history of struggle was already in his blood, right? Maybe manifested in a different context, right? But notwithstanding, his dad was an artist, musician, minister, and then so many years later, fella finds himself doing something similar. That there's always a thread. There's always a thread that comes in that. I, Before we close out this interview today, I want you to speak a little bit about your work because I think that's to know you, and I'm so glad you've indulged us in some of this great robust conversation. Is also important to know some of your art, your music, as well as your film and how you think through the process. And so I wanted to ask, you know, how do you feel? How do you feel like your art, whether it's music or your film, how have you used them as a conveyor of uh of 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 learning for others, like a place where you're creating a space for others to learn about both history, for them to embrace their identity, to embrace the struggle, but also to find strength, because we're talking about from struggle to strength. And I think the overarching arc of your story, when I hear your mom, when I hear you, when I hear the story, there was obstacles along the way, and there's still obstacles. It doesn't mean that obstacles just fly out the way. But our story is not only just defined by struggle, but it's also defined by, in the midst of the struggle, the ability of human resilience, God's help to resist darkness, right? And to say, you know what? I find strength in the midst of the challenge. How has your music or art, how have you been able to use that to convey strength for people as they have in maybe engaging in particular struggle? And I know that particularly firsthand because I know some of the content of your work, but can you speak to the people a little bit about how that's informed your work?
It's always a challenge. I think about that all the time.
Mm,
You know, you mentioned earlier about me not being cynical, and then you said about the faith, and about faith in the kingdom and our Father. I said, no, I'm not cynical about that. I'm cynical probably about most, if not everything else. And and I don't say that as a badge of honor. I say that as a lament in a way, but we draw hope from knowing that there's a plan, knowing that there's a purpose, knowing that there's direction. Because most of the hopelessness is feeling like everything is directionless. It's feeling like it's just toxicity to no end, right? It's just destructiveness. Plan and hope and purpose are the opposite of destructiveness. And so keeping that in mind, it starts with being hopeful about my own purpose. And I mentioned before about being born for something. You know, you hear people say, I didn't ask to be born. I didn't ask for this. Nobody asked for this. Nobody asked to be born. No, it's not really how that works. Um, but there's purpose. We're born for purpose. And, it may be, we're told in the scripture, some vessels are for noble and some for, common use. And those words sound like dirty words, but they're not dirty words. It's only in this kind of westernized capitalist prism that those become dirty words. You know, sometimes, you know, there has to be like rebar and concrete in the foundation of a structure. You don't get to be the forward facing glass or, this kind of ornamental design on a facade. You get to be underground beneath the surface and common common use refers to such things, those things that hold the entire thing together, that this thing would not exist without and could not persist without. So, recognizing purpose is recognizing value, implicit and inherent value.
Mm,
Um, for me, that continues to return and stops my art from becoming cynical as I find God's hand leading me
mm,
through the creation of it, even when I'm not doing explicitly gospel messaged
mm,
material. You know, um, I understand people's concern over that, and I understand really the reasoning behind the um, the insistence upon that. But it's, God is not confined to genre specific art. Art is a means and a tool. It's not the thing. It's or the goal.
mm,
Right? It's important and it's more valuable than we realize, more meaningful than we realize. But it has a place. It has a place. It's not the place. We could study Bezalel and understand that God cares enough to imbue him with his spirit in order to do his creative work, artistic work within the temple.
mm,
But Bezalel wasn't a Levite, you
mm,
know? So there's a place. Um, but I have a song that I wrote. I'm developing with a couple of other artists on a new project called No Wonder. And No Wonder refers to the double meaning of a childhood without wonderment.
mm,
As we talk about and dissect cynicism,
mm,
you know, as we delineate it, like, okay, cynical in this way, not that way, kind of thing.
mm,
Childhood, that is, youth is synonymous with wonderment, with hopefulness.
mm,
And there's certain things that we endure as Black people, people of color in this society that robs us of it. Um, and it's a hard song, you know, for that reason. The other meaning of no wonder is like, it's no wonder you feel that way. It's no wonder you see the world that way, having gone through those things. So it's the lack of wonderment and the lack of surprise. No wonder. It's a hard song, but I've been very vividly led in the development and the writing of it,
mm,
more vivid than any of my other songs on the project. And I've
mm,
been led through all of them, but this one has been part of the reason why I talk about reflecting on God's purpose is because of the experience of writing the song,
mm,
because I don't even know practically, I mean, I do outside of myself, but within my heart, I don't know why he would care about some raps that I wrote.
mm,
But And I could put the verse in the chat.
Mhm.
Um, as I said, um, it the the chorus says no rest for the weary, my eyes red and teary, sleep patterns way too far off to get near me. Can anybody hear me clearly? My brain lacks an off switch, thought waves breaking bad and raw, no anesthetic at all.
Mm,
I'm wide awake, stay connected to all my sinking feelings beneath the surface, tethered to deeper purpose. I'm going under. It's no wonder. The verses, summer days, gunners blaze, to put it bluntly. Killer bees swarm like tropical storms with no honey. I suggest you move the money. It ain't safe. Can you vault the neighborhood border wall? We never braced for the drug war impact.
mm,
You could tell by my buck-tooth grin, too much of a jackass to follow, my trust too thin. But anyway, my trouble thick and rich like Mrs. Butterworth.
mm,
Can't just bottle up another hurt.
mm,
When the shuttle burst across the clear sky, when none survived, ex-kids watched it live.
mm,
We was have-nots who seek not, with a lot to hide. Maybe too much to drop this pride before the fall. No idyllic enrollment at Sarah Lawrence. It was scary hours, waiting for Judgment Day. Sarah Connor. And we knew T2 lines came from Jody Watley. Fed subsidized cartels holding hostages over poppy seeds.
mm,
Ozone burning. Chaotic agents popping, locking me out of my property. Raising. Arrested housing development. The property value drop is steep. I'm sleep.
mm. Bars. Mm,
Sorry for the crassness of jackass. I didn't want to say donkey. It didn't
mm,
work.
mm,
I needed the impact of of a little bit jarring language
mm.
um to describe my posture, my point of view, you know,
So funny.
my trust being so thin.
Mhm,
Um, we've experienced, and the more you learn about the experience, the harder it gets to be hopeful. But the hopefulness comes from, you know, when I wrote this, I wrote the Mrs. Butterworth line, I wrote the Jackass line, I wrote the Shuttle line, Sarah Lawrence. I saw images in my head as I penned them,
mm,
and I tried to come up with the most creative way to describe it. But I saw that donkey,
mm.
you know, and I knew that it was me.
Mhm.
Uh,
Wow. Wow.
and I knew that, you know, everything we know about donkeys, they're obstinate, and it's like, why is it obstinate? Well, you know, you trying to lead me to the giant with the sword who gonna
Heck
kill
no.
us both. I'm not going your way. Why you running us into the bushes? It's safer there, you know? But
Well,
anyway,
really an expert.
it's just that mistrustfulness is hard earned.
Mm,
Um, and I thought about Mrs. Butterworth because I saw that kind of bottle spinning in my
mm,
spirit. And I thought about people rapping bars about Miss Body like Mrs. Butterworth.
mm,
And why is Mrs. Butterworth a comparison? Because she's thick and rich. And I was like, my troubles are thick and rich.
mm,
You understand me? It's not really a sexual thing,
mm,
it's and bottled up, and when you're not transformed, you're burying your baser nature, for the sake of appearance. And so, I can't just bottle up another hurt. How long keep doing this?
mm,
You know what I'm saying? And
mm,
then the next two things to not go through the whole thing, but just to wrap it. The shuttle burst across clear sky. You responded to that. I know you know what I was talking about. We saw the space shuttle explosion when we were in school.
mm.
That kind of thing marks a kid. It changes a kid. There was
Mhm.
also a thing, I said this, Waiting for Judgment Day, Scary
Mm.
Hours, No Idyllic Enrollment of Sarah Lawrence,
Mm.
Sarah Connor. Judgment Day is Return of the Lord. Judgment Day is the end of the world. Judgment Day was the name of Terminator 2.
Okay.
She was waiting for the day when Skynet took over and launched the nuclear codes and caused a global destruction, which is called Judgment Day. When I
Mm.
was in high school, same time, same era, when the space shuttle burst happened,
Mm.
um, they showed us a movie called The Day After in school. That was a movie about the day after nuclear holocaust,
Mm.
how the world looked in the aftermath of, acid rain and, zombie apocalypse,
Yeah.
you know. And I remember leaving that class with a migraine.
I
You
would
know,
too.
I remember having nightmares about seeing missiles flying in the sky,
Mm.
and you waiting for that.
Mm.
Um, and so, there's no wonderment available when you're being bombarded. Aside from that, the verse ends with like, you know, arrested housing development, you know,
Mm.
Fed subsidized drug cartels,
Mm.
you know, environmental disaster lurking,
Mm.
right? It's a whole lot of stuff that affected a generation, and then you grow up into a certain worldview and you experience things from a certain pure prism. If you understand history, you don't understand why you are who you are and why the way you are. Why you responded that way. I've been very struck by not only my own behaviors that I've been blindsided by, but other people being blindsided by their behaviors. People that declare a certain attitude, approach, or position, and then act in the complete opposite, and then forced into like a spiral of justifying and
Mm.
repeat, cycle of self-destruction,
Mm.
because you're not self-aware.
Mm.
You haven't been put under the light, you know, under the transparency to be able to understand, well, this was an injury that you suffered,
Mm.
and because you have unredeemed character, undeveloped character, you respond to your injuries in this way and not in another way, an elevated way,
Mm.
a godly way. You respond to them in a human way.
Mm.
So it leads to more self-destruction, self-destructiveness,
Mm.
self-destructive behavior. Um, I like to tell stories that inspire hope by focusing on what I call urban legends, which are stories about ordinary people who do extraordinary things.
Mm.
And that, you know, these are people that you could understand that God has given something to, but they don't look the part.
Mm.
They would be obscure if it was up to,
Mm.
the general society. David was sent out far away so that the prophet would not misunderstand and somehow give him a mantle that's meant for his greater, stronger, more beloved siblings, right? And just make sure that Samuel doesn't come over here. Samuel getting old. He can't see like he used to. I don't know if that works spiritually too, but I'm just gonna have to assume that it does. So we're gonna have to hand him, you know, his prophetic vision on a silver platter. We can get David on out of here, man. He smell like sheep anyway,
Mhm.
you know. So,
Mm.
but the ordinary person that does something extraordinary, right? He wasn't great in stature. He wasn't somebody who looked like he could take on a giant.
Yeah.
I like telling stories about people like that, and I hope to spend a career doing that. These kids at San Francisco State were those kind of people.
Mm. Mm.
You know, Black students. To this day, you never hear about the fact that that was the largest and longest student-led movement that was led by Black students.
Mm.
Never before or since has anything that uh, um, impactful occurred with this many different disparate groups in lockstep behind the leadership and vision. of a group of black kids
Yeah, yeah,
from around the way.
from around the way. And I think that's why I think your rendering of that story is going to be important as well. Is that for those gaps we see, it just gives us more treasure, like a treasure hunt, right? To be able to find those gems and put it out to inspire another generation. Um,
Absolutely.
because the years ahead and what's ahead of us is going to require more inspiration. Nothing, a lot of history is cyclical, like people, things are done because humanity has, there's something inside of us, eternity is in the hearts of man. And that thing that cries out for freedom, the things that cries out for justice, um, at the end of the day, inside of humanity. And for us black people around the world, in America specifically, I said, I was saying something recently where I've loved it's been toxic to see uh well, black people interact with each other, whether African Americans react, interacting with, blacks from UK, blacks from Africa, from the Caribbean, and in a way kind of educating each other, giving each other, like different viewpoints, where many of us are separated over centuries now because of the atrocities of the transatlantic, slave trade, and what led black people, a lot of black people around the world. And what I would say about that is, I think African Americans have a unique perspective on this type of evil that we see in the world that we're living in right now, because African Americans specifically have been at the eye of that evil empire. So the perspective that African Americans have been able to ascertain over the last 400 years is quite different from what, for those of us who are like in the other ring of the concentric circle. Like, if you're at the epic center, there's a way you're going to look and react to the atrocities, right? Or do you understand the brunt of this, the weight of this thing, and the mechanisms that prop up, white supremacy in our culture. And even what I'm saying right now, I know some people on our platform might feel uncomfortable with me saying white supremacy, but I'm going to say it anyways because it's an evil that actually does exist. So we'll put it out there. And if you don't like it, it's just what it is. It's just the facts. But the reality of it is this: is like within African Americans being able to interact with it and coming up and being resilient in the face of this thing, being at the epicenter of it. It's very unique that for other Africans or people of African descent and the rest of the world, they've also interacted with it in different ways. But the perspective that we all can learn from each other, I think, is critical. So as I think about Black History Month, I think about the lessons that Africans and other blacks in that diaspora can learn from African Americans, and vice versa. What African Americans and those who in the Caribbean can also learn from Africans back on the continent. And I think that one of the things we've seen with the musical exchange that has happened in the last few years, where especially with the ascent of Afro beats being such a big thing, and there's a lot of that cultural exchange that's happening. I think it's those soft landings, right? Or the year of return in 2019, where a huge swath of African Americans going back to Ghana and connecting to the motherland in a unique way and things like that. I think there's part of that narrative where to be told. And I think it's God allowing maybe black people around the world to reclaim their own story, to reclaim their own narrative. For someone not to just to that too long have we shared our story through the prism of whiteness, right? Or whiteness adjacent, but that we can tell our stories. We can tell our thing, that our story did not just start with slavery, or even if it's the uniqueness of the culture that was formed here in the Americas, then we have a unique opportunity to say, well, God was in the midst of it. And that's kind of what I love about what you said, that even though there's struggle, even though there is things that I don't know why, I think it was Brett. You remember Pastor Brett Fuller from Washington D.C., the Every Nation pastor. They used to wear bow ties. I don't know if you remember him at
Yeah, I
all.
do.
He used to speak. He spoke. I think I was in his church during the whole thing that happened with Trevor Martin, and that whole at that time in the social unrest that came up as a result of that, which is almost like Trevor Martin's situation. That story was like that that story that happened at the time when he wearing the hoodie. That was a watershed moment because that really was around that. This is around Obama's. I think that's Obama's first term, right? Um, I think that was 20. Is that 2012? If I'm correct, I
Yeah,
think it's
around there, 2012.
2012. Yeah, and we haven't looked back since then, right? Things have just kind of like, not to say those things didn't exist before, but it just seemed like it escalated in a different kind of direction. And so, when you look at some of these things and how they've kind of all percolated over time, it's so incredibly important for us to continue to be truth tellers, to understand that the places that God places us to speak truth about what we see and the condition of what we see, that God tells us, like, do this to the least of them. And a lot of times in our culture, people of color have been the least, right? By certain designs. But it's not lost on God, right? God is also in the midst of that, working out his plan in the individual lives, working his plan for people of color, whatever that might be, around the world, and letting us kind of capture that in the lessons that we can learn from that. So I think history, as I even look at some of the things in our contribution to humanity and what God has called it, that we are valuable as well, that God has created us in his image, in his imago Dei, and that we shouldn't let anyone take that and rewrite our story or reduce us to some like side note history, but that this story of humanity, and that God has placed man in this earth at this time for, that we're part of that narrative. And I think in that place, you can also begin to find, man, there is greater purpose, that I was born for this. I was born for such things as this. And I think that image of purpose also sometimes is very interconnected with the image of one's journey and history. Because when you know where you're coming from, you know where you're trying to go. If you know where your people have come from, you know what is possible within that. I think Dave Chappelle said something recently in one of his monologues. It's like, he said, I know what my people have been through and I know what they've walked through. So I know that I have something to aspire to, and that's what is part of it. And I think it's an important reminder for all of us in that as well. Jahmal, I think you've been great tonight helping us. We got to have you come back again. Is there any recommendations in your work that you want us to go check out? I want to have you to plug some of your work real quick before we get you off the line. You have a few work out there, whether it's your music, whether it's your film, that we could plug, and and get a chance to enjoy, see, challenge, and grow from. Anything out there you want to recommend to the people?
Most of my most of my work is not really viewable as much publicly. You mentioned um, whether Spanish Fly are still standing or still on Amazon Prime on demand. They might be out there to be seen. At any rate, you can keep track of what I'm doing, what I'm up to on my website, jamalholland.com, spelled the way my name is. You can see it in my screen if everybody sees it the same way. Jamalholland.com. It's pretty simple, and you could access my social media, IMDb, and all that through that. My Instagram is just my name, and Twitter is my middle name, middle initial, Jamal J. Holland.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so you could keep track of me. Most of what I've done that is viewable, you could find it through the website. Like some of the music video work. Um, I did Andre Swilly's video, who's a social media influencer, had a hit record internationally. I did a video for him, and it's almost 2 million views on that. um, which is kind of a nice bookend from the
Me too.
viral one you mentioned earlier, which was 2010, and his was
Mhm,
2020.
mhm.
So that's
Yeah.
interesting, sort of a full
Nice
circle.
round, nice round. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Other
That's
than that, the doc that I'm working on, we've gotten interest from Universal and Paramount, and the San Francisco State doc, and also PBS. We
great.
may go through PBS and then license it to the other places after that initial run, if we go that route. But that's also a lot of these things are of concern because of the current
Mm,
administration's fund cutting and anti this type of material. And so there's like more hurdles to cross
mhm.
comes to all of it. So we'll see how it goes.
No, we were definitely in support of your work, Jamal Holland. Anywhere you look online, social
Yeah.
media, you
Music I've
definitely
done in the past is on whatever music streaming platforms, Spotify, Apple, Tidal. I mentioned that I'm working on a new project which will be available everywhere when we're ready to put it out.
awesome, awesome. Thank you so much again for your time. My name is Shay Ola. I am the founder and curator of Wisdom for Life and Leadership platform. This is our podcast, our first interview actually of the year, last day of the Black History Month, and we're glad to
Hate it.
interview uh, great guest Jamal Holland. And thank you so much for spending the time with us. I know it's getting evening time in California right now, the West Coast,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Dinner
and
time soon.
getting a little bit late on our end over here. But we're grateful for you being on the platform. We will. This is obviously live streamed, and so we'll repackage, and you're going to get it on our page and with some other edits on it, so that you can get some of the information that was shared here. But I want to thank you all again for being here with us. And if you haven't subscribed, liked our this video, and also get an opportunity to subscribe to our channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification. That's going to give you ability to be able to see what we got coming up next. And we're excited for some other interviews that we have coming up. Actually, next month, the 15th, we have another guest, Dr. Chelsea Turner, coming to speak to us as we focus on Women's History Month. And yeah, we will celebrate diversity on this platform and continue to speak on those things. So I believe it's important to God as well. God bless you all and have a good one. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.